Long Beach, California, July 31st, 1923. I was just out of high school. I was drafted in 1942 in December, and I didn't go in the service until I think the 21st of January, 1943. I'm thinking way back now. In Keesler Field, Mississippi, and found out I was in the Air Force, Army Air. This is an education for me because I wasn't out of California very long, and to get down the deep south where we still had the black and white problems going on. My basic training was 28 days rather than 3 months with the infantry. And then we were sent to Buckley Field in Denver, Colorado. And I went through armament school there and graduated from there as an armorer, taking care of the armament on an airplane, consisting of the machine guns, service weapons, and the bombs. We had a pilot, a navigator, an engineer, a waist gunner, and myself, who was the tail gunner of a B-17. We became a lead crew, and at one point, and as a lead crew tail gunner, we would take off first, circle the field, and as the other planes take off, they try to form on us. And I would use a Aldous lamp, which is a very powerful light, colored, and point at these different airplanes and give them in code who we were so they could form on us. There are 4 squadrons of 9 planes in a group.
But that was for training, or was that for the real deal?
No, this is the real thing. And we would get these groups together. I was old. I was 20 years old then. Yeah.
How many missions or flights do you guess you
We started out and they told us we had to do 25 missions. It happened that we had bombed most of Germany and France, and we were on our 25th mission when we were scheduled to go to a place called Abbeville, which was in France, and it was a headquarters basically of the German Air Force. And the idea was to knock the Air Force on, or keep it on the ground. And our job was that we broke off when we went on to France to bomb the beaches in Calais and Dieppe. After we broke off the formation, we bombed the beaches. The beaches were mined with, I think, around 100,000 mines per square acre. The Germans had put on there. They expected us, the invasion of Europe, to be at Calais. And most of their aircraft and armament was in that area. This was the 5th of June, and we were all set to go home and actually go home on a bond tour and back to the States and so forth, and we were looking forward to it. And on our way back home, or back to England, something hit us. We don't know what. I have tried to research this through many people, and I can't get a straight answer on what happened to us, whether our wingman, right wingman, was hit and crashed into us, or whether we were actually hit. They say we were hit by a ground-to-air missile, something new that the Germans had. They had many missile launchers in that area. But we were 6 miles out on the English Channel on our way home. And like I say, we had a terrific explosion in the nose area of the plane. And it blew our navigator and our bombardier out into space. These people, they were killed immediately. And as we bailed out of the airplane, the co-pilot, sitting in his seat, had a chest pack, and the pilot had a backpack, which are different types of chutes. But in the chest pack, you clip it on your harness, pick it up, clip it. And on the end of this chest pack, there's a carrying strap and a ripcord. In reaching under his seat for the strap, he pulled the ripcord, so he popped his chute underneath his seat and panicked in mind. He couldn't. We tried to get him hooked up with the engineer, who was a small man, and the two of them could have gone out in the same chute, but we couldn't control him, and we had to get out of the airplane. It was beginning to break up pretty bad. And so we went out and left him in the airplane, so he also was killed. In coming down and landing, most of the guys lived on the beach, where the Germans were very plentiful. I lived about 100 yards inside of the coast in a very large tree. I don't know what kind of a tree it was, but I came down right in the middle of that tree and injured my left leg. I hyperextended my left leg in this branches and so forth going down. And of course the chute canopied over me, and I stopped, and I was hanging loosely in my harness, and I couldn't get out of it. About that time, I could hear gunfire, and I could hear them popping through the chute. And I thought, well, if I'm going to die, I'm going to go down fighting. So I could see where the flashes of the guns were down below, and we all carried 45 pistol and a shoulder holster. So I was able to get that out, and I emptied 2 clips into the clip is 9 rounds, and I shot about 18 rounds down at where I could see the fire from the other weapons. Then everything stopped. And it was a little bit of time. And then in perfect English, down below me, somebody said, "Are you okay?" I thought it was one of my crew members. So I said, "Yes, I'm okay, but I'm stuck in this harness. I can't get out of it." And the gentleman who was talking said, "Well, I'll send somebody up and help you." So I was waiting for one of my buddies to come up and cut me loose from the canopy and so forth, and try to get me out of my harness. And up came a German soldier in uniform. Well, he helped me get out of my harness and helped me down out of the tree. And when I got down, there stood a sergeant, German sergeant, and he asked me if I had a cigarette. Well, I said yes, and I had a pack of Lucky Strikes in my pocket or canopy, and I gave it to him, and he took one out, handed me back the pack. Well, I figured this is kind of funny, but he was a young man from Yonkers, New York, who had gone to Germany in 1939 to bury his grandmother and was conscripted into the military at that point. Very, very good-mannered and everything, and he didn't take my wristwatch and everything that I had and so forth like you expect them to do. And he helped me to about 100 yards to a small house, it's all a wooden house. And we went in the house, and he set me down in a chair. It was a wooden chair, and you know how you back a chair up to the wall and so forth, so it's on 2 legs. So I did that because my leg hurt. I told him about it, and he said okay, and he went out and left at that point. And I gave him the pack of cigarettes, which he was very thankful for. And he went out, and as soon as he went out, there was a commotion outside of the house. And the door flew open, and here stands a man, the carbon copy of Erich von Stroheim. Now, do you remember anything about Erich? Well, bald head, monocle, little 25 caliber pistol. He looked at me, pulled his pistol out, started shooting it to the ceiling, and waving his hat with his other hand. And I couldn't figure out what the heck this guy wanted. And the sergeant came back in the front, and he told me he wanted up. As soon as I stood up, this gentleman who was either a colonel or general or something or other, calmed right down and yelled a few commands and left. Well, they took me to an ambulance, took me to a hospital. And on the way to the hospital, we picked up my ball turret gunner and one of my waist gunners. The waist gunner was a gentleman named Bill Moreland, and he had hit pretty hard coming down, evidently, because he shattered his pelvis. He was in great pain and screaming and so forth. And we went to the hospital. They took him out. Took Rohasek was the ball turret gunner's name, Don Rohasek. He was the only oddball in the airplane that we call. He was Polish. The rest of us were Irish. And at that point, they looked at my leg and they decided it was a sprain, it wasn't a break, and so forth. So they put me back in the ambulance and took me quite a ways to a town called Lille, L-I-L-L-E, I guess, or Lille, France. And on the top of a hill, there was a monastery, and the Germans had used that monastery as a headquarters or viewpoint in that area. So we were taken to this monastery, you might say, and they put me in the basement. The basement had huge barrels of wine in there. There was three of those on one side, one light bulb, and in the center was a chicken wire cage and a table inside. And they put me in this cage, took all my clothes, threw me a blanket, and I used the table to lay on. Long about, it was late in the evening, a group came down, German soldiers, and they opened this cage and turned me around and threw me head first over this table. And then there was a lot of talk and so forth and laughter. And then at that time, I was held down by two regular German soldiers and sodomized by what I figure was a German officer, because the only people with shiny boots in the German army were officers. And I could see the boots. I couldn't see him, but I could see the boots. And this happened about the third officer that came in to do this. I decided that, okay, they're going to shoot me anyway. So I pivoted on my bad leg and turned and hit this guy in the groin very hard with my left leg, or right leg rather. And he screamed and turned around, and about that time somebody hit me in the back of the head with probably was a rifle butt, and knocked me out. And I don't know how long I was out before that, but the next morning there was an awful lot of commotion, because at that time it was the 6th of June, and 1944, 43, 44. And Eisenhower and troops and so forth had hit Cherbourg in Normandy. So they were all moving south, I would say, German army, and they were moving out of this cathedral or whatever it was. And they left gave me back my clothes that I came in with, and disappeared. And they took me by car or truck and to a place. We were put on a train, and the train, I remember, went through Tournai, Belgium, and we had hit that marshalling yard that morning. Our Air Force did, and so we had trouble getting through this tracks and everything. Just one track going through this big marshalling yard. And we ended up in Brussels. Big station of Brussels, a huge station. It's like the big one in London. And we were taken in there and sat down on a bench. There were 6 of us at that point. And we sat down on a bench. And well, we were there maybe a few minutes, and then in came a group of little old ladies, and they started screaming at us and beating us with our umbrellas. Oh, no. But they weren't hitting us very hard. And one of the ladies slipped a note to one of the fellows. And after everything calmed down and the German MPs and so forth that moved these little old ladies out, we read the note. And the note says, "Follow the man in the red coat." That's all it said. So we sat down on the bench again and waited, maybe 15, 20 minutes. And then a door opened in the middle of this big station, and this fella came out with a red coat, the whisk broom and the dustpan, and he was picking up cigarette butts and everything, and papers and everything else in that area. And we looked at him, and finally he looked at us, and then looked at the door and kept going. Well, the door stayed open, so we got up, walked through the door. So at that point, we were in the French underground. And we followed we were hidden in a potato cellar at first, and then after that, a gentleman come in and got us on a bicycle. And this was at night, of course, about 10, 11 o'clock at night. And he was on a small trail on his bicycle. He said, "Follow me." Well, I hadn't been on a bicycle for a year or so. So I did pretty good. Some of the other guys didn't do so good. But trying to follow this guy in the black of night and a small trail was something else. So one of the guys, we came to a turn in that, and most of us turned and he didn't, and he went straight down the hill, and the bottom of this hill was a French pub with German soldiers all around it. Well, he hit these soldiers just like bowling balls would hit pins, and they just went everywhere. But they were just drunk enough to where they thought it was a lot of big fun. Well, they put him back on his bicycle and rode him back up in the hill, pushed him back up the hill. So anyway, we kept going, ended up in another potato cellar. This is about 3 days, and the fourth day, we got up and did the same thing. At night, we had to go by bicycle on the trail. And we ended up to the next port, and the fellow who was leading us left. Another gentleman picked us up, took us right into Nazi headquarters. So the Germans had picked up one of these cells. We were considered enemies. I remember they interrogated us quite a bit, slapped us around a bit, and then took us back. At that point, we ended up in Frankfurt, Germany. And then we ended up on a train station and put in a boxcar. The boxcars are smaller than our country. They're what in the World War I they called them, what was it, 40 and 8? 40 and 8, where they would hold 8 horses or 40 men. Well, they put 80, we had we had 82 men there from different areas that they'd captured, and were put in this one boxcar. And you couldn't sit down or stand up, and everybody couldn't sit, so he had people stand. So somebody there was evidently smarter than the rest of us, and he had everybody count off 1, 2, 3, 4, and all the even numbers stand and the odd numbers sit. And every half hour we changed off there. We were taken then on this boxcar in Frankfurt, and the next port of call, I think, was Stettin, which we were stopped in a big marshalling yard there. We had 2 buckets for toilets and no water. And we found out there that you can live without food for quite a while, but you can't live without water. A lot of the guys were getting a little funny and talking crazy and everything. And we were finally given water there after the third day, I think. But we stayed in that marshalling yard, and while the British bombed it, the British bomb at night. Their planes fly every 30 seconds. The bombers do. It's quite something to watch I didn't get to watch it until later in the year, but The British came in about every 30 seconds and bombed this big marshalling yard. And why we weren't hit, I don't know. And that's where they knew what they call Stalag Luft 4. And where the barracks were all on stilts. So they put you in these barracks, and if you did get out, there were many dogs turned loose at night that would find you. And I spent from the 4th of July till about the 9th of January, 45, in this camp. And then of course, in October, the weather turned, and by the 1st of November, it was 50 degrees below zero in the winter. And that was the coldest winter in Europe it had in many years. That was
And that was in 45?
45, yeah. The winter of 44 and 45, yeah. And at that point, there were two groups. One group marched, or they were all put in line, and marched 80 miles across Europe to Bremen, and were liberated there by the British. The walking wounded, as we were, went south, and we went from East Prussia, Kiefheim, to Nuremberg, walking in the dead of winter. And this was something else. But one thing Hitler did, he had every big farm had two barns. One barn for the livestock, and the other barn was just hay. And so he could billet his troops as he moved them across Europe. And so we stayed in these nice clean barns, and there was always chickens and eggs and things like that on a barn around. So at that point we were beginning to eat pretty good. I hadn't had an egg for a year, so it tasted pretty good. So we marched into Nuremberg. Nuremberg, we were stationed at an old Hitler youth camp on the hill. They called it Stalag 13. And that's when I was able to watch the British and how they bombed, which was a real education. It was like the 4th of July. They'd send a mosquito bomber, one of their fastest, 2-engine, into the area, and the mosquito bomber would get all the guns firing and everything at it, but it would spin in and around the area that they wanted to bomb, and they would lay different flares. They would lay a green flare around the area they wanted to bomb, and if it was questionable, a yellow flare, and a camp like we were in, a red flare. And after that, this 2-engine bomber would go right straight up in the air, and about 5,000 feet, he'd throw out a big arc flare, would light the whole area. They marched us from Nuremberg south, and we marched for 3 or 4 days, And then we came into an area where there was a lot of people, farms and things this way. And as we crossed the Danube River, our own planes came down. We thought they were covering us, but it wasn't that way. Our own planes came down and strafed us, bombed us, tried to knock out all the bridges across the Danube. And at that point, we ran into the woods. And this was late in the afternoon, so we stayed in there until it got dark. It's dark about 4:30. And we had a German guard with us, and there were 5 of us, 6 with me. And everybody wanted to know, well, how do we get back on this and so forth. So remembering the old Boy Scout days, you say, well, moss grows on the north side of a tree. So we all found the north side of what we thought was the north side of a tree and took off, hoping to go back to where we started. And don't you believe it, that moss grows everywhere in Europe. So we found ourselves going west, and we came across the Autobahn from Munich to Nuremberg. This was at Neustadt. It was the town we were going into. We came to a large Autobahn, and not thinking, we thought, well, we don't want to go over it, and there might be Germans on top of it, which is foolish. They're under it too. So we went right into a German patrol. And they didn't know what to do with us. So they put us in the back of their truck, and we went down the Autobahn. And we drove quite a long distance. And then we came to a very large camp, a German high command, and everything was there. We were kept in that camp for a while. There were quite a few soldiers and people around, and tanks and everything this way. And then we were there about 2 days, and all of the stuff left. But they left us working with the Russians, who were the workhorses for the German army, feeding the ovens in Dachau. It was quite a large camp. On one side was where they housed a lot of Jewish people. And these people were working in a factory, which was in the middle of this, making things for the SS German division that was on the other side of it. We were in the middle on a small hill with about 10 or 12 ovens, and we had to go in and clean these ovens. So you can't burn a body by a wood fire. This I tried to forget about quite a while, but we were there, I think, about 10 days feeding these ovens. and wondering why the Germans were killing so many people. But the morning, about the 10th day we were there, all of the German army moved out, just bodily, out of the barracks and so forth there, and left us and a bunch of Hitler Youth and the Jewish people in the barracks. As we were leaving, we left in a funny little jitney car that a German guard had got and took us out. And we traveled about 20 kilometers or 15 miles to a place called Moosburg, where the Germans are bringing all the prisoners of war from Europe into that point. And there were about 10 to 11,000 prisoners of war there from all nations. They had us build it in huge circus tents and things this way. Well, I arrived there on the 28th. I left the 17th and arrived the 28th of April at this camp. Was given a bag, and which we filled with hay. It was a German burial bag, actually, and we filled it with straw that the Germans brought in to make a bed, and that was our bed. We had maybe 1.5 blankets per. It was still 50 below at nighttime. The daytime, the sun come out, it helped a little bit. But we learned, as we got to the Moosburg, that Patton had crossed the Rhine and he was coming to get us. We had American aircraft overhead coming in, dropping messages, American flags and everything to us. At that point, we were still at German occupancy. On the 29th, about 9 in the morning, a tank from the 14th Armored came straight in, knocked the front gate off, and came into the main part of the Moosburg camp and stopped. And of course, everybody tried to get on the tank and screamed and so forth and so on. There was a lot of stories at that point of what happened to this tank. But this tank was commanded by a gentleman who now lives in Palm Springs. His name is Tom Gibbons, and we've been friends for many years. But he was the first guy in there. He was our liberator, as we call him. And our destination was New York. We then spent, I think, 5 days in the Atlantic. And then coming into New York Harbor, we were told there was no berthing, that these German POWs were on pass in Boston. Well, about that point, we wrecked the mess hall and were taken by these whistle-blowing MPs and put on a Pullman train. And all across the country, we weren't allowed off of that train. We were like prisoners again.
But in America.
But in America. We got to Camp Beale, and like I say, there was no rank showing. And we got off the Pullman train and were told to line up. At about that time, a couple of corporals came out and thought we were new recruits or something. So the first thing he said was, first thing y'all got to do, he says, is police the area. That's pick up cigarette butts, papers, everything, put them in the trash. Well, the only thing that went in the trash that day was the corporal. So they wanted, to me, it seemed like at this point they wanted to get rid of us as quick as they could. So we were put on the train again, and those of us in LA County and Ventura County and San Diego and so forth were put on this train, and we were given our passes, our orders and so forth. What happened to me didn't happen to a lot of the other people, but similar things did. I've heard many, many stories of how people were treated. This is an education for me because I wasn't out of California very long.